Well, let's get some expert insight into how the cruise industry is navigating the pandemic. Let's bring in veteran travel journalist David Yeskel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So start by talking about where the global industry stands currently, because some cruises are taking off again. So which cruises are back in the water and which ones are still on hold?
So in Europe, Europe's two biggest cruise lines, MSC Cruises and Costa Cruises, have actually been sailing in the Mediterranean for a couple of months now, largely free of incident. So they're using a health and safety protocol template that's largely worked for them that will be followed by other cruise lines as they start up around the world. But in the US, as was just mentioned, the CDC just released this new framework for conditional sailing. So I've read it, it's 40 pages, and it lays out a clear set of health and safety protocols that the cruise lines sailing from US ports will need to meet and prove that they can meet before they allow these ships to sail out of US ports.
And as you mentioned, there's this distinction between some of the rules in Europe and then the CDC. So in trying to navigate all these different precautions and rules, talk about some of the steps that the cruise ships are now taking.
So they're going to be testing everybody who's going to be on board prior to boarding, and that is all crew and passengers. So there'll be tests at the pier. There'll be ongoing testing on board the ships. So basically the ships sailing out of US ports will be required to have onboard lab capacity that they can test. They're going to train the crew in social distancing, helping passengers with masking. Dining operations will change completely. People will be spread out more. And they'll have to be able to mitigate any cases of infection on board with isolation and quarantine if necessary, and even evacuation to shoreside facilities. The cruise lines have to have all of this in place before they're going to get the permission to actually resume their revenue sailings.
Now, I want to talk about the mindset in terms of people's comfort level. I mean, we did see that the first Caribbean cruise since the pandemic began now has at least 5 passengers who've tested positive, according to NBC's interview with the ship's captain. And that was despite travelers being required to provide a negative COVID test several days before boarding, once they were on board. And then it was another round of testing that actually detected that first case. What can the industry do to really ease passenger fears?
So in particular, that ship, the Sea Dream 1, was sailing from Barbados and was not subject to the CDC's regulations. So even though they did testing of everyone before and on board, there was no masking requirement on board, and that will be a CDC regulation. So, we'll see what the postmortem shows. The ship is back in Barbados. We're going to find out more in the coming days, but the rules for ships sailing out of US ports will be much more strict. And I think there'll be a greater level of care in those sailings. And so people should know that the CDC won't permit any ships to sail until they've passed over a month's worth of testing, both with just crew and with simulated voyages with volunteer guests.
And obviously that does come with a lot of expenses as well. So financially, where does the cruise industry stand and what sort of decisions is that forcing them to make?
So the good news for the cruise industry is that the 3 largest players in the industry, Carnival Corp, Royal Caribbean Group, and Norwegian Cruise Line Holdings, were all able to raise funding in the private markets earlier this year. And that funding essentially gave them enough capital to last for a year without any operational revenue coming in. So it was a pretty amazing thing, but even so, they're burning through cash at a very fast rate. Their ships just sitting around cost them at least $1 million per ship per month to keep in what's called a cold layup status. And they're selling off some of their old ships, not only to raise cash, so they're selling these ships for scrap, but just because the cost of keeping them around is so high. And it's unlikely that these older, less efficient ships will be that attractive when cruising comes back. The lines are going to bring back their ships slowly, and their newer ships get a higher price premium and have all the bells and whistles that people like, all the latest features and functionality. So the newer ships will be coming back first, and that's why the older ships are kind of being sold off or displaced.
So then do you envision the cruise industry making 2021 its year of recovery, or is that even further off into 2022 and beyond?
So I think it's going to be 2021. The industry actually needs it to be 2021. They're going to be running out of money in the next few months. So I think that we'll be through this CDC testing phase, hopefully by February or March, and the lines will be able to start up some test sailings before then and hopefully be back to revenue sailings maybe in late February, probably at the earliest into March, but definitely by spring. And that's when the restart will happen, but it will be slow. The CDC is only going to approve one ship at a time permitted. So the cruise lines won't get the go-ahead to release all their ships at once, and
Right.
frankly, they won't be ready to do that. So it'll be slow progress, but I think we're going to see a comeback in 2021.
And just quickly, most people do associate cruises with retirees, a group that's most at risk for COVID. But more recently, demand has been skewing younger. So talk about the demographics of today's cruise passengers and why that's been changing.
Yeah, so the average demographic age of cruise passengers now is about 46 years old, so much younger than it was a few years ago. There are a lot more active opportunities on board. There's rock climbing, surf riding. So the industry has been drawing newer, younger passengers, and that's brought the average age down, obviously. So the lines do a very good job. The different cruise ships and different lines cater to different demographics. They all do a very good job of that, but I think it's generally trending younger, and that augurs well for the industry.